I am Sierra. A few hours ago, I almost died on an operating table while my mother was raising a crystal glass at a charity gala 5 miles away. For 9 years, I have been the silent engine of my family's luxury, a human ATM fueled by my own exhaustion. I poured my youth into their bank accounts, paying a premium for a love that, as it turns out, was never truly mine. And tonight, while I was gasping for air with a punctured lung and a newborn daughter fighting for her life in an incubator, my family finally showed me exactly what that investment was worth. It turns out my life wasn't worth the price of a seat at a VIP table. Have you ever felt like the invisible one in your own family? Like you're only visible when there's a balance to be paid or a crisis to be solved? Drop a comment and let me know where you're listening from and what time it is for you right now. I'd love to know who is part of our community. The air in this Palm Beach private clinic is filtered, chilled, and smells like expensive antiseptic and discarded promises. Outside the window, the city is a blur of neon and gold, a playground for people who value reputation over pulse rates. I can feel the weight of the cast on my right arm, a heavy white reminder of the metal that crushed my ribs and sent me into a spiral of eclampsia-induced chaos. But the physical pain is white noise. It's secondary to the cold, clinical clarity that has settled in my mind. I am lying in a bed that probably costs more per night than my first apartment, and I am utterly alone. My daughter, a tiny, fragile miracle named Emma, is in the neonatal intensive care unit 3 floors up. She was pulled from me in a hurry of blood and sirens. And while a stranger in a blue scrub suit watches over her heart rate, my mother, Michelle, is currently co-chairing the Diamond Heart Charity Gala. I can almost see her, the perfect society matriarch, draped in silk, smiling for the photographers and making sure the world knows just how much she cares about the children, just not her own. I remember the last thing I saw before the anesthesia took me. It wasn't my mother's face. It was the young, terrified eyes of a paramedic who couldn't believe a 36-week pregnant woman was being cut out of a wreck. I tried to tell him to save her. I tried to say that Emma was the only thing that mattered. I didn't know then that while I was being wheeled into emergency surgery, my husband, Joshua, was frantically calling Michelle from Seattle. He told me later, his voice shaking with a rage he usually doesn't possess, that she didn't even let him finish the sentence. When he said I was in a serious accident, when he said our daughter was being born early and he was 6 hours away by flight, she didn't ask if I was breathing. She didn't ask which hospital. She told him that I always have these emergencies and that Madison, the golden child, the sister who has never known a day of real work, was having her art gallery debut. Michelle actually said that reputation is everything in Palm Beach. She said she couldn't leave the gala because it would look unstable. It was a cold revelation. For a decade, I had been the silent investor in their version of family. I had bought into the contract that said if I provided the resources, I would eventually earn the love. I was the one who worked 80-hour weeks as a high-end event planner, the one who lived in a cramped studio, so I could send $7,500 home every single month. I thought I was paying for Grandpa George's medical treatments. I thought I was keeping the family legacy from drowning. Now, staring at the ceiling of this sterile VIP suite, I realized I wasn't paying for health care. I was paying for a subscription to a family that only exists when the bill is due. This wasn't a relationship. It was a transaction. And looking at the transaction history of my life, I can see that my compassion has been a luxury they have overdrafted for years. The hospital room is silent, except for the rhythmic, taunting beep of my heart monitor. Each pulse feels like an accounting entry. 9 years 100, 8 months, $810,000. I used to think of that money as a bridge. Now I see it for what it was, a ransom. I was paying them to pretend they cared about me. But tonight, the mask didn't just slip, it shattered. My phone sits on the bedside table, its screen glowing with a notification that arrived at 11:51 p.m. It's a text from Michelle. I don't need to open it to know what it says. I saw it through Joshua's eyes earlier. He had been crying. I don't think I have any tears left for a woman who values a charity gala over her own flesh and blood. The clock on the wall ticks toward 1 in the morning. Palm Beach is still awake, still partying, still pretending. But in this room, the machine has stopped. I am 32 years old, and for the first time in my life, I am not wondering what I did wrong. I am not asking why I wasn't enough. I am simply looking at the balance sheet. Anger isn't loud this time. It isn't a scream or a breakdown. It is clinical. It is a sharp surgical incision that removes the rot. I reach out with my left hand, the one that isn't encased in plaster, and I pick up the phone. The glass is cold. The glow of the screen is a different kind of sunrise. It's the kind made of facts and numbers. I unlock the phone. I ignore the missed calls. I ignore the sympathetic texts from my coworkers. I go straight to my banking app. It's a habit I developed to ensure they never went without. I used to open this app with a sense of duty, a heavy feeling of, if I don't do this, they'll lose everything. I scroll through the scheduled transfers. There it is, $7,500, set to leave my account on the 1st of every month. I look at the label I gave it, family support. I feel a ghost of a laugh in my punctured lung, support. It was a payroll. I was the employer, and they were the most entitled staff in history. My mother thinks I'm dramatic. She told Joshua that I always find a way to take the spotlight away from Madison. She thinks a punctured lung and 3 broken ribs are just a performance. Well, if she wants a drama-free celebration, I'm about to give her one. I'm about to give her the kind of silence she's never experienced. With one steady tap, I cancel the automatic transfer. Are you sure you want to cancel this payment? The app asks. It's a digital safety net. I don't hesitate. I confirm. But I'm not done. I realize that Michelle is currently at the Diamond Heart Gala. She's co-chairing the auction. She's probably using the secondary credit cards I issued her, the ones linked to my corporate account, to bid on jewelry or art to keep up the facade of her old money status. She thinks my credit limit is her birthright. I navigate to the managed cards section. I see the 2 platinum cards I gave her for emergencies. The same emergency, she says, I'm always having. I see a pending transaction from 20 minutes ago, $5,000 for a charity donation. I don't call her. I don't text her. I don't give her the courtesy of a warning. I select both cards and I hit deactivate. I report them as no longer authorized. Then I access the household account, the one where I am the primary owner, and my parents were merely authorized users. With a few taps, I revoke their access and transfer every cent into an irrevocable trust for Emma. By the time the sun hits the Atlantic, their lifestyle will be a frozen asset. I watch the numbers move. I watch the balance on their side drop to 0. It takes less than 12 minutes. Conflict at 11:51 p.m. Retaliation complete by 1:03 a.m. I set the phone back down. I rub my eyes, trying to summon a shred of regret. But there is only a profound, icy clarity. This wasn't a breakdown. It was a balance sheet adjustment. They weren't shocked by what they had done to me. They were just comfortable in the belief that I would never stop playing along. The room feels different now. The lights aren't as harsh. The beeps of the monitor sound like a countdown to a new life. I am no longer the silent investor in their lies. I am the owner of my own future. Somewhere at a gala 5 miles away, A waiter is about to bring a machine to my mother's table. She's going to smile. She's going to swipe that card with the confidence of a woman who has never had to earn her own way, and the screen is going to flash red. It's going to say declined. And for the first time in 9 years, I won't be the one answering the phone when she calls to ask why. I'll be here in the quiet, watching my daughter breathe. I lay in that hospital bed, the rhythmic beep of the monitor keeping time with the pulses of pain in my side, and I started auditing my memories. This wasn't a journey of nostalgia. It was a forensic reconstruction of a 10-year fraud. I realized then that my mother hadn't just spent my money. She had spent my entire youth. I had been the silent investor in their version of a family, but looking back at the ledgers, I see now that it was never a partnership. It was a one-way extraction. It started a decade ago, right after I landed my first junior executive role. I remember the call like it was yesterday, the stage tremors in my mother's voice, the heavy sighs of a woman burdened by a tragedy she hadn't yet invented. She told me Grandpa George was dying. She said his heart was failing, that the insurance companies were rejecting his claims, and that without a specialized clinic in Miami, he wouldn't see the next Christmas. I was 22, fueled by a sense of duty that Michelle had carefully cultivated in me since I was old enough to tie my own shoes. I didn't ask for medical records. I didn't call the doctors. I just asked, how much? That was the trap of normalizing cruelty. It wasn't a sudden theft. It was a slow, methodical erosion of my boundaries. Michelle had parentified me so early that I never learned how to say no to her. She raised me to believe that my only worth was my utility, that I was only lovable as long as I was a provider. While Madison was encouraged to be artistic and free-spirited, I was taught to be the reliable one, the one who carried the weight. In Michelle's world, cruelty wasn't loud or violent. It was the quiet expectation that I would set myself on fire every month to keep her social calendar warm. For 9 years, I lived in a state of self-imposed poverty to fund her Palm Beach performance. I worked 80-hour weeks, taking on every grueling contract and every late-night crisis that came my way. I lived in a studio apartment that smelled like damp laundry and stale coffee, eating generic brand ramen while I wired $7,500 every single month. I told myself I was saving a life. I told myself that the tired, quiet voice of my father in the background of our calls was the sound of a man mourning his dying father. I was wrong. It was the sound of a man who was too much of a coward to tell me my mother was lying. This was the invisible chain of a survivor. I was a prisoner in a cell with no bars, held captive by a sense of obligation that had been groomed into me. Every time I thought about cutting back, Michelle would weaponize my guilt. She'd mention a new experimental treatment for George or a sudden complication with the house. She made me feel like every dollar I kept for myself was a minute I was stealing from my grandfather's life. My compassion was a luxury they had overdrafted for so long that I didn't even recognize the debt anymore. I looked at the total on my mental balance sheet, $810,000. That is nearly $1 million of my life, my sweat, and my security gone into the void of Michelle's vanity. I could have had a home. I could have had a college fund for Emma that was already fully matured. Instead, I have 3 broken ribs and the knowledge that I paid for the very silk dress my mother is currently wearing while she ignores my existence. The clarity I feel now is lethal. I used to think of my transfers as family support, but I see now it was a subscription to a lie. Michelle wasn't a mother. She was a predatory account manager, and as I lay here listening to the soft, rhythmic breathing of the air filtration system, I realize that the debt has finally been settled. I don't owe them my silence. I don't owe them my loyalty, and I certainly don't owe them another cent. This isn't a breakdown. It's a final, permanent foreclosure on their version of reality. The silence in my VIP suite didn't last. By 1:15 in the morning, my phone started vibrating against the glass bedside table, a relentless, buzzing demand for an explanation I no longer felt obligated to provide. I didn't need to answer to know the script. The Diamond Heart Gala reached its peak around midnight, which meant the live auction was in full swing. Michelle would have been standing near the stage, basking in the spotlight as she prepared to make a high-profile bid with my currency. She would have swiped that platinum card for a $5,000 centerpiece or a $10,000 vacation package. And for the first time in a decade, the transaction hadn't been approved. I watched the screen glow with her name, Michelle, then Madison, then Michelle again. I didn't feel the familiar surge of panic or the desperate need to fix her embarrassment. Instead, I felt the cold satisfaction of an auditor closing a fraudulent account. My mother's reputation was a bubble inflated by $810,000 of my life, and I had just provided the needle. When I finally pressed the speakerphone icon on the 6th consecutive call, I didn't say hello. I waited. The background noise on her end was a chaotic symphony of clinking crystal, muffled orchestral music, and the sharp, jagged edge of my mother's breathing. She wasn't at my bedside, but she was certainly in a crisis. Sierra? Sierra? Are you there? Her voice was a hissed whisper, vibrating with a rage that was barely contained. What is wrong with your bank? I am standing here with the auction coordinator, and they just told me my card is deactivated. Do you have any idea how this looks? The Breakers is full of people who matter, and I was just made to look like a common thief. I looked at the cast on my arm, then at the IV line, feeding fluids into my exhausted body. I deactivated the account, Michelle, I said. My voice was level, devoid of the tremors she usually exploited. The subscription has expired. Subscription? What are you talking about? Your father's medications, the house, everything is tied to that account? She was spiraling now, her voice rising in pitch as she realized the family support machine had finally malfunctioned. I told the coordinator it must be a technical error, but she looked at me with pity, Sierra. Pity! You need to call the fraud department right now and tell them I am an authorized user. I am the one who reported you as unauthorized, I replied. The words felt like a surgical strike. I am in the intensive care unit with 3 broken ribs and a punctured lung. My daughter is in an incubator. And your first concern is your social standing at a gala I paid for. Your reputation isn't my responsibility anymore. It's a bad investment, and I'm divesting. There was a stunned silence on the other end, followed by a sharp intake of breath. She didn't ask if I was okay. She didn't ask about Emma. Instead, she hung up. Seconds later, a notification popped up from Madison's Instagram. It was a photo of the gala ballroom, beautifully lit and impossibly glamorous. The caption was a masterpiece of passive-aggressive manipulation, celebrating love and legacy tonight, even if some family members choose to use their personal struggles as an excuse to be vindictive. Praying for my sister's mental stability. Bitter is a bad look in Palm Beach. I stared at the screen until the light dimmed. They weren't shocked by my accident. They were insulted by my defiance. They were trying to frame my survival as a breakdown to cover up their social bankruptcy. I set the phone face down. My mother's rented status was crumbling, and Madison was trying to patch the cracks with lies. But they didn't understand the new math. I wasn't the victim in their story anymore. I was the one holding the ledger, and I was just getting started with the audit. I didn't spend the rest of the night scrolling through social media or waiting for Madison's next performative prayer. I didn't wait for my mother's next hissed demand. By 3 a.m, the adrenaline of betrayal had transformed into a cold, predatory focus. I realized that $810,000 wasn't just a loss. It was a trail of breadcrumbs. I needed to know exactly what that money had bought, because I knew now it hadn't bought a single minute of my grandfather's life. I didn't start this investigation from scratch tonight. For 6 months, ever since my mother's stories about Grandpa's treatment stopped adding up, I had been quietly gathering digital breadcrumbs. I had already put David on a retainer. All he needed was my signal to finalize the forensic trail I had already begun to blaze. Using my left hand, I called a contact from my professional network, David, a forensic accountant who specialized in unmasking the financial skeletons of the Palm Beach elite. I told him this wasn't a family matter. It was a liquidation. I was the primary creditor, and I was calling in a decade of bad debt. By 4 a.m., from my hospital bed, I had authorized him to access every record associated with the accounts I had funded. Sierra, this isn't just poor money management. David told me over a secure line 2 hours later. His voice was as flat and clinical as mine. The $7,500 you've been sending every month didn't go to any medical facility. There are no records of payments to a clinic in Miami or a pharmacy in Palm Beach. In fact, George's insurance has been covering his routine checkups for years. I felt a ghost of a sensation in my chest, but it wasn't pain. It was the feeling of a final thread snapping. I asked him where the money went. David explained that the funds were redirected into a shell company registered under Michelle's maiden name, a holding entity called Ethereal Estates. But the money didn't stay there. It was used to pay for a high-security, climate-controlled storage unit in Miami and a series of private couriers. I wasn't a victim anymore. I was an auditor. I spent the morning reviewing the digital ledger David was compiling. For 9 years, I had lived in a state of constant financial anxiety, thinking I was the only thing standing between my grandfather and a grave. Instead, I had been funding a secret archive. I began building a legal dossier, organizing every forged medical invoice Michelle had ever emailed me. I saved every frantic text where she claimed George was in a crisis and needed an extra $2,000. I was no longer the reliable child. I was a hunter. Every transaction was an entry in a criminal case I was preparing to file. I realized that my family hadn't been protecting a legacy. They had been cultivating a fraud. And the storage unit in Miami held the key to exactly why Michelle needed nearly $1 million of my life. I wasn't going to wait for them to explain. I was going to use the facts to dismantle the house they had built with my sweat and blood. The audit reached its conclusion at 10 in the morning. David sent a final password-protected file that didn't just explain the theft, it revealed the shadow gallery. For years, my mother had bragged about Madison's overnight success. She told the world that every single one of Madison's abstract canvases had sold out within hours of being posted. I used to feel a twinge of guilt that I was the boring corporate child, while my sister was an artistic genius. But the ledger told a different story. The buyers for every single piece of Madison's art were shell companies, funded by my $7,500 monthly transfers. Michelle hadn't been paying for Grandpa's heart medication. She had been secretly buying out Madison's inventory to manufacture a fake career for her golden child. $810,000 wasn't a medical fund. It was the marketing budget for a fraud. I sat there, the blue light of the laptop screen reflecting off the white cast on my arm, and I realized the illusory power of the empty wallet. My mother's entire social standing in Palm Beach was a rented facade. She wasn't a co-chair because of her lineage or her business acumen. She was a co-chair because she was the biggest donor at every auction. And she was the biggest donor because she was spending my life like it was loose change. Without my family support payment, she wasn't a matriarch. She was just an unemployed woman in a rented silk dress with no internal character to stand on. The door to my room swung open. I expected a nurse with more painkillers or a doctor with an update on my lung. Instead, a man walked in. He was tall, his posture as straight as a judge's bench, and his silver hair was cropped close. He wasn't wearing a hospital gown or hooked to an oxygen tank. "Sierra," he said, and his voice was the same deep, authoritative baritone I remembered from my childhood. It was Grandpa George. He looked vibrant, healthy, and absolutely lethal. I stared at him, my breath hitching in my chest. "Grandpa," Mom said. "She said you were in a clinic in Miami. She said you were dying." George pulled a chair to my bedside, his jaw tight with a fury that made the air in the room feel heavy. "I heard about the accident from Joshua," he said, ignoring the lie for a moment. "He told me you were here alone? He told me what Michelle said to him?" He reached out and squeezed my good hand. "I am not sick, Sierra. I haven't been in a clinic in Miami for 10 years. I've been living in my home, wondering why my oldest granddaughter never called me, never visited, and never sent so much as a Christmas card." I stared at him, my heart breaking. "Grandpa, I sent hundreds of letters and emails to the address Mom gave me. I even sent videos of my wedding. I realize now she owned those accounts. She wasn't just my mother. She was the gatekeeper of a reality she built to keep us apart." Shame, cold and suffocating, washed over me. "She told me you were too weak for visitors. She said the medical bills were hundreds of thousands of dollars. I sent $7,500 every month for 9 years, Grandpa. I thought I was keeping you alive." George closed his eyes for a second, and I saw the betrayal register on his face. "She told me you were too busy for family. She said you were traveling the world as an event planner, and that you didn't want to be burdened by an old man. She even asked me to sign over my power of attorney last year so she could manage the estate while I aged." He pulled a thick manila folder from his coat. "She forged my medical records to guilt trip you for a decade, Sierra. She turned my existence into a ransom note. But she made one mistake." He opened the folder, revealing the real medical documents. "She forgot that I still have friends on the bench. And tonight, I'm not here as a grandfather. I'm here as a witness to a crime." The doorbell of my hospital room didn't ring. It was pushed open with the frantic, entitled energy of a woman whose social currency had just hit zero. Michelle burst in, her diamond heart gala gown wrinkled at the hem, her perfect society mask cracked by the sweat of a sleepless night. She didn't look at the bassinet where Emma was finally sleeping. She didn't look at my cast. She looked at the phone in my hand like it was a detonator. "Sierra, thank God you're awake," she gasped, not even bothering to lower her voice for the baby. "There has been a catastrophe. The gala vendors, the caterers, the florist, even the valet company, their checks were returned this morning. They are calling the board members. They're talking about a public scandal. I need you to sign a temporary emergency loan authorization, just $50,000 to bridge the gap until we fix the bank error." I looked at her, and for the first time in 32 years, I didn't see a mother. I saw a failing business entity. I saw a fraud whose overhead had become unsustainable. I shifted Emma slightly in my good arm, her warmth a stark contrast to the ice in my veins. "There is no bank error, Michelle," I said. My voice was a flat, clinical line. "The machine is off. The subscription to my life has been canceled for non-payment of basic human decency." "Don't do this now, Sierra. This is our family name on the line." She reached for my hand, that practiced, pleading gesture she used to secure another $7,500. I pulled back. Behind her, Grandpa George stepped out from the shadows of the window corner. Michelle froze, her face turning a ghostly shade of gray. The Martinez name was built on honor, Michelle, George said, his voice echoing like a final verdict. You built yours on a ransom note and the blood of your own child. I reached for the folder George had given me and tossed it onto the pristine white sheets of my bed. $810,000. Michelle, that's the cost of the Shadow Gallery. We know about the shell companies. We know you used my money to buy Madison's art, to forge her success, and we know George was never sick. Michelle's mouth opened, but no lies came out. For the first time, the gala matriarch had nothing to say, because the bank was empty and the witness was standing right in front of her. She had traded my life for a gala. She had left me bleeding in a wreck, so she wouldn't look unstable at a party. You traded my life for a gala, I told her. My words, precise and lethal. Now, you can trade your reputation for the truth. Grandpa's meeting with his attorneys this afternoon to finalize the fraud report. David has already sent the audit to the Diamond Heart Board. By sunset, Palm Beach won't remember you as a philanthropist. They'll remember you as the woman who stole from her dying daughter to buy fake fame for a child who never worked a day in her life. Sierra, please, she whispered, the tears finally real, born of the terror of being irrelevant. We're family. No, I replied, closing my eyes. We were a transaction, and I've just filed for bankruptcy on this relationship. Get out of my room. Don't call. Don't visit. From this moment on, you are a stranger who happens to share my last name. You chose the gala. Now you get to live in the silence that follows. As security escorted her out, the room didn't feel empty. It felt clean. The weight that had been crushing my chest for a decade, the weight I thought was duty but was actually a forged debt, finally lifted. To those of you watching this, to those who are currently the reliable one, the invisible one, or the family ATM, this is my letter to those always on the edge. I know what it's like to set yourself on fire to keep people warm. Who wouldn't even offer you a glass of water if you were dying? I know the guilt they use, like a weapon. But I need you to hear this. Choosing yourself isn't selfish. It is survival. You do not owe your life to people who only value you for your utility. You are enough exactly as you are, without a balance sheet to prove it. I used the recovered funds and the inheritance Grandpa George settled on me to start the Martinez Foundation for Parentified Children. We provide legal and psychological support for those escaping the same invisible chains I wore for 10 years. Emma will grow up knowing a mother who knows her own worth. She will grow up in a family that shows up not because there's a check waiting, but because love doesn't keep a ledger. That night, for the first time in years, I slept without the noise of their expectations. I looked at the sunrise over the Atlantic and realized that my revenge wasn't the forensic audit or the social exile of my mother. It was the fact that I was finally, truly free. If this story made you realize your own worth, please hit the like and subscribe button. Your support helps us share more stories of justice and healing. Drop a free in the comments if you've ever set a boundary that saved your life. Remember, you deserve people who choose you back